Sometimes even good people can make a mistake. And when it happens, it's one of the most intense and emotional experiences of your life. It could be a DUI, or maybe you were in the wrong place with the wrong people at the wrong time. Or perhaps you just did something stupid at the spur of the moment without even thinking, and now you're in trouble with the law. Well, you need experienced legal help right away so you don't become a victim of the criminal justice system. Even good people can make a mistake, and if you, a friend, or a loved one has been accused of a crime, don't make another mistake by hiring the wrong attorney for the kind of help you need. You need to visit toddjohnslaw.com. That's toddjohnslaw.com, and then call Attorney Todd Johns today. Attorney Todd Johns has decades of experience helping good people like you who have made mistakes or bad decisions and will stand by you every step of the way. toddjohnslaw.com.
All right, hello and welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I am your host, Mr. Bill Rader, and joining me this week for an exciting episode is my co-host, Sean Kane. Sean, what's going on, buddy?
Billy Raids, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. I am doing great. We have really exciting episode this week. This is one that we were looking forward to, especially considering who our guests were.
Yeah.
We had obviously Paul Bleau, who we've had on before, who is one of the authors of Chokeholds. And then we also had on Mr. Jim DiEugenio, who we've had on many times before. And Jim gave us a real good kind of recap of his experience testifying before the Luna Committee on the JFK assassination. It was fascinating, Sean.
It was. I mean, anytime you get these two guys on, it's like podcast gold, Billy, because they're legends in the field. I mean, and Jim, just to testify, before Congress is epic, and it was great. And he did a fantastic job, and he gave great detail on everything. And then we talked a little bit about the recent file dumps, and then we talked to Professor Bleau about his recent articles on Jim's website, Kennedy's and King, and one on the PEPE Letters, which really incriminates, Oswald and shows a conspiracy, really. And then the other one was on the 1960s in the Lansdale Playbook. The General Lansdale, of course, was Dulles' man in the military, and he ran a lot of the regime operations and psych ops and stuff. And it was just fascinating. We talked a lot about a lot of the characters that we bring up, Angleton, Harvey, Morales, Roselli, all these guys come up, and it was just a really fascinating discussion with two of the best in the field, Billy.
Absolutely. And Jim gave us some kind of inside stuff too about what was going on at the hearing. So it was a great episode all around. I think enough of us talking about it, but before we get you there, just a reminder to check out our Patreon. We do a weekly show on our Patreon called Speakeasy. Plus, Sean's constantly uploading articles, and
I'm about 4 or 5 a day now, Billy. And the thing is, it's generating tremendous discussion because we got so many people that's active on our Patreon, and we really created like a community. And there's a community chat that goes on these articles, and Scott Alfieri's one of them. Dave Whelan's on there, Lisa Pease, Linda's on there. There's so many different people, and Dan Hankey. I don't want to forget him. Jim Richmond is another one. All these guys are contributing, and all these people, and it's just tremendous. And I don't want to leave anybody out, Bill, because there's a lot of people.
Scranton Dave, don't forget.
Scranton Dave, like how could I forget Scranton Dave? There's so many great comments and questions, and it opens up doors to new material, Bill, new questions and stuff, and it's fantastic.
Yeah. And there's different tiers you can join for as much or as little as you want. You can join for free if you want, but in order to get a lot of this content, it starts at $1 a month. So that's Sean, I always say I lose $1 just in change in between the seats of my car in the in the center panel.
And
So
so let's give a shout out. One last thing, Bill, before we get
yeah,
to Jim and Paul. Let's give a shout out to our sponsors. We have a lot of great sponsors. A lot of them come and go,
yeah,
but we have two that's been constant, been with us from the beginning, and that's Todd John's Law. Todd John's fantastic. We've had him on our Patreon, and the other is Dave Clem, DK's Corner. Fantastic restaurant. My brother just went there with his wife yesterday. They ate outside, and he said it was just the food was just tremendous. So
yeah.
shout out to those guys. They've been our longest sponsors. They've been with us, and both of them have tremendous businesses.
Absolutely, yeah. And like you said, Sean, we've had some sponsors come and go, and they're all supportive, very supportive of the show, and a lot of them it's just the economy that's the
Yeah, a
reason.
lot of them. And Tom Maxey's another one. Tom Maxey's been with us for a long time.
Yeah.
Gracious Day Grains. He's tremendous. We've had others, and when the economy turned, some of them had a.
Well, these are all small businesses, John. Keep in mind they're small businesses, and there's limited budget for them sometimes, and we appreciate their, even if they just sponsored one or two episodes, we really appreciate everybody, certainly our Patreons as well. And yeah, this is just, again, Sean, I know we've said this a number of times, and this is essentially a labor of love for us. I mean, we don't really make any money from this. It's just the money that we do get covers our costs of the different things that we do on this show. So the equipment and
we try to
services and
promote
things
these
like that.
businesses on all our social media too. All the apps around. We're on about 10 different social media now, and
Right.
try to promote these and get them good business.
Yep. All right. So, well, that's enough out of us, Sean. We don't want to talk anymore. We want to get to this great episode. So enjoy Jim DiEugenio and Paul Bleau.
All right, there we go. We all set now?
We're set. Let's go.
Hey, we could have a comedy hour instead of just.
We already are. That's
okay. I kind of like using the phone.
These guys don't need any introduction. They've been on many times, but Jim, let's start with you. I want to talk to you about we're going to get to Paul's articles on Kennedy and King, but I want to talk about your appearance at the Luna Conference with Oliver Stone and Jefferson Morley.
Well, on my Substack, I actually wrote a column about this. All right, and it's called Jim and Oliver Meet the Luna Committee. All right. Now, at the beginning, Oliver wasn't even going to go to this thing. Okay. He wasn't going to go. And I just wrote him a memo. These are the things that you should ask her to go get. Okay. So that day, Oliver was supposed to call me before he talked to Luna. All right. So I didn't get a phone call. And then his assistant calls me, okay, and says, Jim. I go, yeah. And I said, I thought Oliver was supposed to call me. And she goes, well, that was before this happened. And I said, before what happened? And she goes, I'll let him tell you about it. Okay. So Oliver gets on the phone and he says, we're going to the congressional meeting. And I go, when did you decide on this? He goes, well, I just talked to her and she seems pretty nice. I don't think we're going to get bushwhacked. Okay, so let's go to this meeting. I go, fine. All right, if that's what you want to do. You don't argue with a 400-pound gorilla. All right. And so he arranged everything, and it all went pretty well, except for Jefferson Morley's recommendation of the Tabard Inn, which I was very disappointed in. But besides that, I thought it was actually, we went out first class and everything. I had a little detour with my luggage because they registered under his name instead of mine. Okay. But we went to this pre-meeting at Luna's office. And I thought this was going to just be her, Morley, myself, and Oliver. Well, we got in there and it was standing room only. There must have been 11 or 12 people there. This is like 5 o'clock the night before the meeting was supposed to take place. And these people were really interested. They were all Republicans. Let me repeat that. They were all Republicans. And this was going to be a harbinger of what was going to happen the next day. All right. So we talked there for about an hour and a half, setting the agenda. All right. Next day we walk in. The liaison to the committee walked us in to this room. And of course, whenever Oliver does something like this, the paparazzi comes out. Okay. And so there were about 12 or 13 photographers waiting to take his picture. And I go ahead and take my seat. And I go to Jeff. I go, who's this guy sitting next to me? Because I never heard of him. Because the Democrats brought him in to object to the Social Security numbers being declassified by Tulsi Gabbard on the latest batch. I said, the Democrats? And he goes, yes. And that was the beginning of my education about what this meeting was going to be like. It was the Republicans who were there in force. It was the Republicans who had the best questions. It was Republicans who were really interested. Who were really interested in what happened to JFK.
Yeah.
Okay. There were only 4 Democrats there.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
There were only 4 Democrats there. Garcia, who was the co-chair, the Democratic co-chair, kept on asking Jeff Morley for direct evidence. Kept on asking for direct evidence of CIA involvement. And I really wish I would have interrupted at that time, because I don't think Jeff got to the heart of what he should have said. And I don't know why he avoids this point, but he does. I would have said, well, if you want some direct evidence, after Angleton was interviewed by the church committee, he came outside and somebody asked him a question about the Kennedy case. And Angleton made one of the most mysterious and curious comments that anybody's ever made on the JFK case ever. He said, a mansion has many rooms. I was not privy to who struck John. Well, that sent everybody into, oh, what the heck is he talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. So then Victor Marchetti wrote a column for Spotlight saying that the CIA was going to hang out Howard Hunt to dry for the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Howard Hunt sued. He won. Mark Lane took the case on appeal. And he had to find either the memo that said this or somebody who had seen the memo. And he did. Joseph Trento, a journalist from New Jersey, said he saw the memo. All right. And Lane says, well, what did it say? Said, we have to devise an alibi for Hunt being in Dallas on the day of the assassination. And Lane says, well, what do you think? What do you think it was about? He goes, well, it was from Angleton to Helms. So I think, knowing James Angleton, he was trying to tell Dick Helms that, look, I'm not going to take the fall on this alone. If I go down, I'm taking you with me. All right. And then I would have said, now, if Trey Gowdy was here, he would say that's consciousness of guilt. Okay. Yeah. So that's how I would have answered that question. Okay. If it would have been asked to me. All right.
Jim, if I can chime in, maybe just second in, I think our chapter 2 in chokeholds is Oswald's intelligence connections.
Yeah.
Yes.
And if we had to go into Oswald's last call when he was under arrest,
right?
If we had to go into the touch points between him and James Angleton, the time he was being interviewed.
Right.
And he said that, well, in Russia, he was under the protection. Oh, sorry, not the protection. It was a Freudian slip that he made. We go into how Mexico's, and look, Dan Hardway in the last,
Yeah.
very last, what did he say? He said two things that were really important. A, that at least one call, Oswald was being impersonated while he was in Mexico City.
Yes.
And two, that he was being used operationally. I mean, does it get any clearer than that?
Right.
So if they're looking for proof, we have a 20-page chapter that he needs to read, and he'll come out a little bit educated. Otherwise, he can believe he's just
See,
alone.
the problem I think that Jeff had there, okay, he's so intent on what he calls the pre-assassination file, okay, then he actually produced 192 pages or something, that, okay, and so he misses a little bit of the operational stuff, okay, that you can use. And I also believe that Jeff thinks Oswald was really in Mexico City, and he did the things that the Warren Commission said he did, which I do not agree with. And that's another thing I would have brought up if I was asked that question. Okay. I would have said, well, direct evidence? How about this? Dan Hardway and Eddie Lopez wrote up a bill of indictment for Ann Goodpasture and David Phillips about all the lies they told about Oswald in Mexico City. So I think that's pretty direct, isn't it? Why were they lying so much about Oswald being in Mexico City? Why was Ann Goodpasture? How about this one? Because I thought this was very interesting. This is something that Danny and Eddie talked about back in 2014, which I think was their last joint appearance. They were trying to find out who was the first person to get the tapes and the photos from the CIA station observing the Russian and Cuban embassies. Okay. And so they asked Ann Goodpasture, and she referred him to this guy, okay, that they had never heard of. And so they went to him, and he said, "Do you?" And he says, "No, might be this guy." So they go to another guy. Said, "Are you the person who?" "No, might be this guy." Go to this third guy. Okay. And he says, "Are you the guy who gets it?" He goes, "No, it might be this guy." So they go to the fourth or fifth guy, a guy named White. And he says, "No, Ann Goodpasture is the person who gets the race and the photos every morning. Guys, what are you asking me for?"
Right.
See, Ann Goodpasture wanted to hide the fact that there was no picture of Oswald in Mexico City.
Right.
She didn't want to get caught realizing that there was no picture of Oswald in Mexico City, and she couldn't find one. And that's
Right.
why she did that little ballet with the mystery man photo. She actually moved that. Did you guys know this? She moved that photo from one day to another
Yeah.
to make it coincide with Oswald being in Mexico City. Okay, because she knew that if she left it where it was, they wouldn't have a white Caucasian guy there at the time Oswald was there. All right.
Crazy.
So this is how bad things got. See, this is why I said, look, Dan Hardway was really good, I thought, during that meeting. But if there's anyone you should take a deposition from, that's the guy you want to take a deposition from.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So anyway, to get back to me and Oliver and Jeff, it was the Republicans who gave us the best questions. It was the Republicans who seemed the most interested. Okay. And I thought that when I brought up CE 399, okay, and I brought up the 42 witnesses. I thought those were probably my best moments. Okay, when I think I said something to the effect that, no district attorney would ever present CE 399 in the court of law because it would blow up, in your face. I said, there's two things. Number one, it was supposed to have arrived at the White House at something like 9:20 that night. But if you look in Fraser's notes, he has the stretcher bullet at 7:35. How could it be delivered at 9:20 if Fraser already had it and more than an hour before? All right. And then Oliver was trying to say something about the chain of custody and how evidentiary changes took place. And I said, I think what Oliver is trying to say is that in the House Select Committee volumes, Volume 7, page 37, it says words to the effect that although witnesses at Parkland saw a blasted out hole in the back of Kennedy's skull, the witnesses at Bethesda didn't see this. Well, I said when the ARB declassified the records of the House Select Committee, they found out that this was a lie, and just as many people saw this blasted out hole at Bethesda as saw it at Parkland. I think it was something like 21 witnesses and 21 witnesses.
Right.
Can 42 eyewitnesses, can they all have been wrong about seeing this blasted out hole? Okay, no. I don't think so. No. So those are a couple of things that I thought, and I also brought up the fact that the Dallas assassination was the third attempt to kill Kennedy. Okay, in November of that year. I said that there had been 2 prior attempts, one in Chicago and one in Tampa. Right. And I said that the one in Chicago so closely resembled the one in Dallas that if all the records would have been sent through normal channels, the Dallas plot would not have happened because it could have been prevented because of all the clues that you would have had, okay, from the Chicago plot. Kennedy, look, when you look at those three, when you look at Gilberto Lopez, okay, when you look at Valet, okay, when you understand that Gilberto Lopez had attended a Fair Play for Cuba committee meeting, that he then went to Texas, that he then went to Mexico, and he was the only passenger on a Cabana airline into Cuba after that. Well, I think somebody's bells would have been rung, okay, if that all would have been in the record and open, and if Valet being at a base that had the U-2 flight, Valet being a trainer for Cuban exiles, etc., Valet making these disparaging remarks about Kennedy in public, okay, let's put it this way. Kennedy was not getting out of 1963 alive. Okay.
Jim, at Valet being moved into a building that's 5 floors. It's on the motorcade road, with exactly the same view that you would have had at Daly Plaza.
The Secret Service had a lot to answer for, and James Rowley criminally kept them out of charges of negligence, which they all should have been charged with. All right. That was just unconscionable what happened to Kennedy, especially in light of those first 2 attempts in Chicago and Tampa. It was just a disgrace.
If I can chime in just a little here, Jim, I think
Paul, I didn't see you in Chicago. I didn't see you in Washington.
Oh, geez.
If you noticed, Andrew was on one shoulder and Matt was on another shoulder, and I thought Paul would be in the middle, but he wasn't.
No, I was the guy.
I thought he'd be holding our book up the whole 8 minutes.
Well, you make me sound like a used car salesman there, Jim. Thanks. Here are my preliminary remarks about the Luna committee, and I've said this before. As a Canadian suffering terribly from tariffs from the U.S. You know, I'm not a cheerleader right now for what's going on down south. But listen, I was really impressed with Luna. Okay, and I'm telling you why. She is young. She's determined. She's asking the hard questions. She went right out and said last Wednesday, I don't believe in the single bullet theory, you know? And look, if you can think of where we're at now, is you have a Hardway saying what he said, you know, that Oswald was used operationally, that this is all on the record. It's all on the record. And, you know, like this is the seventh government, right, or inquiry into the case.
Right.
And we shouldn't lessen the importance of it because a lot of the witnesses are dead or whatnot. We're hearing things that makes it really lonely to be on the lone nut side. If you're someone who's going out there and saying it's alone, I'm sorry, but with everything that's happening and everything that has happened, who looks more like they're on the fringe right now?
Well,
Right?
Hardaway said that. Hardaway said you wouldn't have to do all these things if it was just a lone gunman.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean,
You wouldn't have to.
exactly. And
it's just-
everybody, and you're hearing, so, you know, like you can paint people like Jim or me or whoever, and you guys to be, you know, in conspiracy theories and this and that. But when you hear a congressional hearings, when you hear what you have there, don't tell me that the tide hasn't turned on these obfuscators.
Right.
You know, so that's what I think is really positive there. If I find there's one thing a bit negative going on is I would hate to see this become too Angleton and Joannides centric, okay? Because I'll tell you what my thoughts are, is though they may have been involved in obstruction of justice, and maybe this proves that there is an Oswald, you know, interest in the CIA, I don't think, you know, if you look at the perpetrators of the assassination, you'll have a hell of a lot more success if you go up the Directorate of Operations, and you'll have more success finding stuff if you go into who handled the propaganda, who handled the hit. And I think you're way more into the territory of people like Harvey and Phillips.
Right. This is the CIA. That's the way they do operations. Everybody has.
Yeah, you
Harvey
know,
would have been the one hiring the mechanics to do this.
yeah, I wouldn't want the Joannides and the Angleton, you know, angle. Okay, good. You're going to prove there are lies there. I
Paul,
can
see,
buy
this is the problem of Morley. Okay, with Morley as our lead guy out there, he's a kind of a, you know, that's what his ballywick is.
He's
His
after the
ballywick
Joannides
is,
file.
you know,
Yeah.
Angleton and Joannides.
Right.
Okay, and
can
I actually happen to agree with Paul that you know the David Phillips, I believe, was a major part
Sure.
of the of the conspiracy, and I also think that Bill Harvey
Sure.
was in on it
But
also,
I think Angleton too. I don't think you can take Angleton out of
and
this. Like some people.
and I also think that Alan Dulles was
Sure.
a
And
part of the plot. Okay,
it.
you know,
But
and
Sean, if you look at a compartmented approach like Jim's talking about, I don't
sure.
think Angleton is front and center in this. You know,
Well,
he's
his role probably would have been
counterintelligence.
more to be in the setting Oswald up, controlling his 201 files. That would have been like if you go back to that, what he said about the mansion, he didn't know who struck John.
Yes,
He's not probably lying
I
because
think
he
that's
wouldn't
true, by
know
the
who the
way.
mechanics are because that's not his role.
No,
Would have been
no.
Harvey would have hired the mechanics.
Oh yeah, sorry, Jim, I cut you off there, but I think that's the danger right now is that they go off on a tangent that you know, and that's why I think that you need to have you know, a democratic approach to this and have people like Jim. You know, Jim. Uh, Jefferson has some his strengths, you know, he knows a lot about Angleton and all that. But I think if you have, in terms of what went down, okay, what actually happened, you have people who've researched the Miami angle, who've researched the New Orleans angle, who've researched the Mexico City angle, and that's where you'll get the picture of what really happened. The people who did this were regime change specialists.
Sure.
Right. And you
Sure.
and it's very compartmented. So you have to
Sure.
be really careful, I think, of saying so and so lied. Yeah, everybody was lying.
Right.
I mean, reading the church committee files these days, the amount of lies coming out in those people they interviewed is crazy. So that, I think, is the thing they have to watch out for. Because there's a big gap between the people asking the questions and people like Hardway and Jim. Okay, so that gap,
They don't have the
who's
information.
going to close the gap there so that
Right.
they're being fed the right information?
And
They
getting
don't know what questions to ask.
right, and getting back to what Jim said earlier, and I forget who it was that asked the question. When they were asking about direct evidence, and I think the right answer is,
Yeah.
what do you consider to be direct evidence?
Well, that's something that Jeff should have said.
Right.
Yeah.
He should have said, well, what do you consider direct evidence?
Right.
Okay, the whole schema of the CIA is to do covert operations. So it's not that easy to find direct evidence. But
There's
I
not going to
would
be
come
a
back.
document that says we did it, signed the CIA. Like that.
Exactly.
And I think he said something to that effect, right? Like
Mhm.
you're not going to find a single document that where you're going to. There's no smoking gun, right? There's pieces that you need to put together that fit into place, and when you look at the big picture, that tells you the story.
The other thing that they asked me about was Gary Underhill.
Yeah.
Okay, evidently that belatedly, because the very first time I wrote a book on the JFK case, I had 3 pages
You
on
did,
Gary
yeah.
Underhill. Okay,
Yep.
and everybody now seems to be catching up to me, something
Yeah.
like 30 years later. All right, and so they asked me about Gary Underhill. All right, and I told them about the whole thing about his friend, the magazine writer Asher Burns, is the guy who discovered the body. He knocked and nobody answered, but the door was open. All right, and so he went inside, and he thought Underhill was sleeping, and then he understood that there was a hole inside of his skull, except the gun was on the wrong side of the body. And Asher Burns was,
Yeah.
I don't think I said this in my testimony. I should have. Okay, and he said words of the effect. He didn't want to talk about the inquiry at all. Okay, but he did say words of the effect. You could not excuse this kind of incompetence unless it was done deliberately. Okay, those are the kind of words of the effect that he said. And supposedly, Underhill had kept files on the JFK assassination. He had started to kept files on the JFK, but I don't think those were ever recovered. Okay, because I think his ex-wife did not want to cooperate with the investigation. Her name was Patricia Underhill. Ramparts did a great inquiry into Gary Underhill. See, those were the heyday. That was the heyday of Ramparts magazine, where Warren Hinkle had a lot of money, and he would be like, the reason Ramparts had all that stuff on Underhill, they hired a private investigation company to do an inquiry. And then they found out about Inter-Armco, how Gary Underhill was working with Sam Cummings, okay, the infamous arms dealer from Inter-Armco, and Inter-Armco had a close association with Klein's, so you have to wonder, I mean, is this how Gary Underhill knew that Lee Harvey Oswald was a patsy? We're never going to know, of course, okay? But there's no doubt that he was one of the very first guys who said that this was a conspiracy inside the CIA, and Oswald was a fall guy. So I'm really glad that that's finally getting out there now.
Yeah, that was impressive. Yeah.
Jim, another great thing that you brought up was about how the mistrust in government kind of goes back to the Warren Commission. And
Yes.
that's when it really started to go downhill, and I think that was an important point.
Yeah. Well, if you take a look at the graph in Kevin Phillips's book, Arrogant Capital, he calls it a portrait in cynicism. When Kennedy took office, 75% of the public believed that the government was sane. It went down in the early 90s to 19%. I think it's about 24% today. All right, but 19%. And if you take a look at his chart, the biggest single year drop off was 1964, the year that the Warren Commission report was issued. Is that a coincidence? I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. I kind of doubt it. All right. So this is what has happened to the body politic due to this creeping skepticism about what the government is telling us. Now, there's no doubt that those figures went down further due to Vietnam and Watergate.
Sure.
Okay, there's no question about that. That's what happened. But I would argue Vietnam wouldn't have happened if Kennedy had lived.
Exactly.
You know, so that would have relieved at least some of the stress. You know, and Nixon would not have been president if Bobby Kennedy had lived. Okay.
Sure. Yeah. And going back to, talking about, I agree with you guys that the Democrats were terrible, but I think all of them, like, they just don't know what questions to ask. But I think the Democrats, Trump has the Democrats so afraid of that word conspiracy because he throws it around all the time that they just don't want to mention it. They just don't want to bring up anything conspiracy related whatsoever. And it's really the sad thing of this whole thing that the Democrats don't get behind JFK. You still got all this JFK disinformation that's out there, the Marilyn Monroe garbage and the mafia garbage and the old man Kennedy bootlegging lies and all this other stuff that's allowed to be, in the mainstream media. And it just really compounds the problem because, they should be focused. The Democrats should be behind JFK as the icon of the party instead of this nonsense that goes on. And that really was a bad performance all around.
The problem is this should be a bipartisan search for the truth, and it's not. Everything else in Washington, it's partisan, it's split down party lines, and it's disgusting.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Well, if you saw the last hearing, Garcia was the only Democrat there.
Yeah.
It was even worse than the first one.
That's sad, yeah.
He was the only one there, and that's because he had to be there. Okay. I mean, it was really a really sad spectacle to see. Now, at this second hearing, you had what? You had Abraham Bolden. You had Mr. Curtis.
Curtis, the doctor, yeah.
You had Mr. Hardway. You had John Thunheim. You had Doug Horn. And then you had this woman who I'm still trying to figure out why she was there.
It was just there to say that Oswald did it. That's all she was.
No. You know what she said? What she said at the end. What she said at the end was that there was no new evidence in this last batch of documents. Like, we're supposed to believe she read 60,000 pages, of documents and decided there was nothing there. Then she tried to say, well, you should really be looking at the King conspiracy because, I hate to tell you, Miss Coey, that's the next one they're going to look into. Okay? All right? So please don't say they're ignoring that. What she was doing there is, I think she was supposed to be another Democratic witness that was supposed to detract from the major. I don't think she did a very good job.
No, she was awful.
I think she kind of fell on her face. Jim,
I want to talk about one of the important things that was released on this latest batch was the Schlesinger memo. Talk about that. And then, Paul, if you want to follow.
I think the Schlesinger memo is very important because it shows in black and white, that JFK was so disgusted with the CIA that he was really going to go ahead and do a reorganization. In fact, Schlesinger did the outline for the reorganization. I think that's 16 or 17 pages that Schlesinger wrote on reorganizing the CIA, and he called it a state within a state, that they've infiltrated the State Department to such a degree that it's hard to figure out where the CIA ends and the State Department begins, because they have so many guys that are undercover in the State Department. All right. I think he said like 47% of State Department employees are really CIA undercover agents, you know. And he brought up the whole situation in Paris, okay, with the attempt by the OAS to overthrow de Gaulle, you know, in which the lights in the American embassy where the CIA guys were on all night. Okay, and they had like 128 CIA employees, okay, at the American embassy. And so this is the kind of thing that Schlesinger was angling for, that we have to get a intelligence gathering agency rather than a covert operations agency. And this was the reason that Kennedy fired Allen Dulles, the main reason, because I think most of us understand that the Bruce Lovett report, I think that was in 1957, they recommended that Allen Dulles be fired. This was David Bruce and Robert Lovett, who were part of the precursor to the Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. Bobby Kennedy found that report, okay? And when he was on the Taylor Commission, he read that report. And he found Robert Lovett, okay? And he brought in the report and Lovett to his brother. And Lovett essentially said, look, we tried to get rid of Allen Dulles. We couldn't do it because his brother was the Secretary of State protecting him. All right.
Oh my God.
But we thought that what he had done to the CIA was turn it from an intelligence gathering agency into a regime change agency. Okay. You have the opportunity now to go ahead and do what we couldn't do. All right. And so that was the final shove that JFK needed to go ahead and fire the whole top level of the CIA. All right. He didn't just get rid of Dulles, he got rid of Bissell and he got rid of Cabell. And there's one other person they got rid of. I don't know if you're aware of this. Bobby Kennedy called in Dean Rusk and he said, is there any other member of the Dulles family in our employ? And Rusk says, well, there's his sister, Eleanor. She works in the European department. And Bobby says, I want her fired too. I don't want any member of the Dulles family in this administration. Okay. So like 6 months before she was scheduled to retire, Eleanor Dulles took premature retirement. Okay. And she was out also. All right. So I guess you call that cleaning house, you know.
I'd say so. Professor, go ahead. You want to add something?
Well, yeah, I wanted to point out that, you know, when you talk about Jim, the prior plots, right, and what Jim brought up, obviously there's a chapter in our book that refers to similar case analysis. So it's not necessarily prior plots, but it's something normally the FBI should have done, right? And that would have been to say, hey, you know, does what happened in Dallas, does it have a signature, or is there a pattern, or is there something like you would do in just about any assassination in a neighborhood, right? You try and look at, say, well,
yeah, it's called case analysis. And if you combine that chapter in the JFK assassination chokeholds with Matt's chapter on the impersonations of Oswald,
oh yeah,
I mean, you really have to wonder. You really have to wonder, how on earth could the FBI not understand what the heck was going on,
Mhm.
okay, between all the impersonations and a thorough case analysis, of places like Chicago and Tampa, I mean, the light was flashing red and Hoover was at the racetrack. Okay. So I guess that's one way to explain it,
Hmm.
uh, just
Yeah.
totally bizarre.
We will be right back. DK's Corner, now located at 201 Cherry Street in Jessup, Pennsylvania, is serving up the area's best tasting food at respectable prices. Known for our great cheesesteaks, DK's also has delicious breakfast sandwiches, specialty coffees, and catering 7 days a week. You'll love the wraps, soups, and pizza too. We're now open Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., and Saturday, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Visit DK's Corner on Facebook to see our daily specials, and make sure to follow and like us while you're there. We offer local delivery to homes and businesses, takeout, or come and dine in our new restaurant in Jessup. Call or text DK's Corner at 570-209-0278 or hit us up on DoorDash. And we thank DK's Corner for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You. We will be right back. Hey, Sean, I want to make sure that everybody knows about our Patreon. I know we mention it every once in a while on the show, but really important that people check out our Patreon. If you go to Patreon and search for That's Enough Out of You, or just click on the link in the description, you'll find we do an extra episode every week called The Speakeasy, and it's really usually just Sean and I kind of talking about the day's events, current events, and things like that. But a lot of exciting things. I mean, I know, Sean, you're constantly putting articles up there on our Patreon.
Yeah, and sometimes, Bill, we do bring on special guests. We had Dave Whelan on, we had Scranton Dave, and every now and then we bring Patreon members on. We've had different members, Scott Alfieri, Michael Pilch, Dan Hankey was on. So, there's an opportunity there if you want to come on the show with us. So there's a lot of things we're doing. Like you mentioned, Bill, the articles. I put articles up on a free site, but I also put articles on Patreon that's not available on the free site. We have a lot of times I put up future intel about guests that we have coming up and stuff that we have coming up on the podcast. And we created a great community there, Bill. There's a lot of chat goes on there. There's a community chat and a lot of the comments back and forth. Just the Patreon members always have great insight. So it's a community, Bill, and it's an opportunity for people to join for a really good price, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, you can't beat it. You can certainly become a free member if you want to. There's also tiered levels with subscription amounts, and just for $1 that gets you everything. I mean, the $1 gets you everything, including our weekly show. There's other tiers. I think, Sean, what is there? A $3 tier?
$3, there's a $5, there's a $10. I mean, and there's a $50 if people could afford to give $50.
Yeah, I mean, totally up to you. Once you join, you can make that decision, and certainly, there's no commitment. I mean, you could join for a month or 2 months or whatever you want, and then you can switch your subscription around. Totally up to you. I mean, that's, people love Patreon for that reason. It really is. It makes it easy. It's kind of, however you want to do it, however you want to join. And we certainly appreciate anybody who joins our Patreon and supports the show, because we definitely, Sean, we're not getting rich off of this podcast, that's for sure. But we definitely, appreciate any support that we get from our listeners.
And we also have our merchandise store. If people want to check out, we have the shirt that I have on now. We have mugs up there. We have cups, hats, anything you can do to help the podcast grow. We also have a bookshop up there, Bill, where all the authors that we have on our podcast, we have their books up. And it supports local bookstores, Bill. The money goes to local bookstores, a little bit to us, and then to the publisher and to the author. So it's a real good opportunity instead of buying Amazon and making
supporting billionaires.
Right, sure. There's an opportunity. And as far as Patreon, one last thing, Bill, if you want to join as a free member, we do put some stuff up there for the free members. And then if you like it and you want to upgrade, you can do that.
Absolutely. So definitely check out our Patreon. Like I said, there's a link in the description to our Patreon, or you can just go to Patreon and search for That's Enough Out of You, look for our logo, and just fill in the information and you can join. All right. That's it, Sean. We appreciate all of our Patreon members, and we hope that you guys will consider checking it out if you haven't joined. Thank you.
Well, you're right, Jim, because you see, it ended up becoming 20 some cases that we looked at. Now, cases could have been things that were in the planning stage or incidents. I'll give you just one example. After Kennedy was assassinated, 2 weeks later, they picked up a guy in San Francisco for making threats to kill Johnson. And he happened to be, like Oswald, like Von Marlowe, like Lopez, part of the Fair Play for Cuba committee. Okay? And if you looked at the similarities in many of these things, it just couldn't be happenstance. There are just too many ex-military types, people being moved from a town to another town just at a timely spot. And in about 20 of these, in about 13 or 14 of these 20 cases that we looked at, there's direct links with the Fair Play for Cuba committee.
Yeah, see, that's something that's really startling when you take a look at Paul's work on this, is that how he has made explicit what authors had only suspected, you know, that there was a direct link between the planning stages and the Fair Play for Cuba committee. And his last couple of articles he did for Kennedy's and King took that even further in a direction that the Fair Play for Cuba committee was going to be a part of the cover-up in the Kennedy case. In fact, to give you a couple of examples from those last two articles, Bill Stuckey asked the FBI if they knew anybody in the Fair Play for Cuba committee in New Orleans in 1962. 1962, he was asking for it.
Wow.
And Paul found a letter that Oswald had written to the Fair Play for Cuba committee in New York in 1962. So, I mean, come on. This simply cannot be a coincidence, you know? All right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You know, I just won't buy that as an excuse.
No.
Okay. The whole buildup of the Fair Play for Cuba committee, with the campaigns against the Fair Play for Cuba committee,
And Santa.
with Carter DeLoach, with Jim McCord,
DeVries.
with David Phillips, okay,
Warren DeVries.
and Warren DeVries, okay, with all these people huddled around the Fair Play for Cuba committee, and then Oswald just happens to be on Canal Street, and Jesse Core, the right-hand man to Clay Shaw, picks up one of his flyers, brings it back to the International Trade Mart, circles the page that he wants the FBI to look at, all right, and sends it in to the FBI before the Trade Mart incident happens. I mean, come on, okay?
But Jim, you know, had I, and this you can find exclusively at Kennedy's and King. I think I talked a bit about it on your show, Sean and Bill. I talked to you about the PEPE letter.
Yep.
Yeah.
The PEPE letter, I'll tell you why I think it's a smoking gun. I think I'm almost sure it's a smoking gun. And the only way you can find a smoking gun by going through these files is not in the file itself. Because if you read one file, as you guys say, you're not going to read Oswald, we met him and we briefed him on such a date. You just won't. But if you can do the connection between one file and a file that is, on the surface, innocuous, but every now and then you say, hey, wait, connected together, what does this mean? right? Okay, so
Right, sure.
so the PEPE letters, I think we were able to do that, and I'll tell you why. If you first of all take 1963 in November, there was a lot going on to make Oswald look like he was pro-Castro. You had his Fair Play for Cuba committee leafleting in New Orleans. As Jim says, it's one of the worst places you could do that on the planet. And it was when the Fair Play for Cuba committee was, for all practical purposes, dead. In 63, they only had 1,500 members, and many of them were informants. Then they go to, of course, he goes to Mexico City. He uses his Fair Play for Cuba Committee ID and his profile, and they come up with this cockamamie story that he's meeting, the head of assassins from the Russian embassy, consulate, and that he's meeting with Cuban agents taking bribes, and the people setting that up are Phillips's guys. Okay. Another thing happens is, in and around the assassination, these letters come in from Havana. Okay, 5 letters come in from Havana. One to Oswald himself saying, hey, my friend, you're going to be a hero in Cuba. The big chief is really impressed by you. I told him you could shoot out a candle from 50 yards away. He couldn't believe it. It was so tacky, but it was made to look like an agent was saying, we wish you good luck in your mission, and we hope you enjoyed the money we gave you in Mexico City, okay, type of thing. Then the other letters, the 4 other letters, they're sent to media, they're sent to RFK, and they purport to be from an informant in Havana saying, hey, when Oswald was in Mexico City, he met a guy called Pedro Charles, and this Pedro Charles is a Cuban agent. So this is all done, to make Oswald look like he's in cahoots with the agents. Finally, the final thing he does is Oswald himself sends a letter. It's supposed to be his last letter to the Russian embassy in Washington, and it talks about Kostin instead of Kostitin, the Russian czar, and it talks about things, but it's typed up and it has very few spelling mistakes compared to his other letters. So the Russians say, this is BS. They're trying to set us up. And they even told. But now when the Americans wanted to go the lone nut route, they had to bury all this stuff, Mexico City, the Pedro Charles letters, that all had to disappear. Now, go back a year earlier. It's the height of the missile crisis. Kennedy's people cannot stand him. They want to take him out. They want him to press the nuclear button. They've had enough of him. Okay, and it's been building up since the Bay of Pigs and even before that, but now by the missile crisis, Kennedy himself is telling Khrushchev, geez, I think I'm losing control here. Now what happens? In November, there are 3 letters that are sent from Havana. They're dead ringers to the letters that came out a year later. They're like the Pedro Charles letters, same sort of warning, same sort of setting up of a patsy. Okay, and the thing is that they were sent in a way that they were sure to be intercepted by intelligence. And when you read these letters, you're looking and saying, well, wait, what the hell is this? Now, I'm going through these files, and by the way, the CIA calls it the assassination plots of 62. They call them that. Okay, and they even warn the FBI and the Secret Service. The FBI looks into it. They take it real seriously. And I'm reading it and I'm saying, geez, this is so similar. And what do I find out in the 10th file? The sender is purported to be Pepe. That's why they're called the Pepe letters. Pepe Menendez from Havana, who had moved into Havana from Cuba. What did he do in Cuba? He was part of the Fair Play for Cuba committee. I mean, does it get crazier than that? I was reading this. I said, they're better.
Well, you said he moved from Cuba to Havana. What do you mean?
No, sorry, I said Cuba, from Tampa to Havana.
From Tampa, okay.
So he was, sorry guys, he was in the Fair Play for Cuba committee in Tampa. Now, are you going to tell me that this, a year earlier, this template with the letters, with the interception, they were setting up patsies, they were sending up rumors that there were Cuban agents in Cuba and the US that were plotting to kill Kennedy, okay? They would have taken him out. This would have been their paper trail. Okay, it would have been their stuff. And they would have said, if it happened in 62, they would have said, Pepe Menendez is behind this, okay, these letters, and he was where the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, okay, the same damn thing that happened a year later. Now, here's the kicker in this whole thing. Who intercepted the letters and who handled all the administration around the letters? It was William Harvey's gang. Okay, William Harvey's gang in JM Wave. And you look at it and you say, oh my God. So that's why I'm telling you, when you go to this Angleton, hangout, you're barking up the wrong tree. You should be barking up people like Harvey and Phillips. You're going to get a much closer link to what went down than if you go into Washington and you go into counterintelligence.
So Paul,
yeah.
Paul, why don't you give us the bottom line and what you think happened?
Well, I'll tell you what I think happened is that first of all, if you look at timing, the decision to take out that I think it crystallized in 62. Okay, sorry. Okay, the modus operandi was
no. What I want to know is, what do you think the PEPE letters were all about?
Oh, well, I think the PEPE letters involved Harvey and Phillips using some of his contacts in Cuba, like he did. I think Phillips was behind the Pedro Charles letters a year earlier. I think Phillips was having his gang from Cuba set up incriminatory evidence, okay, in the form of letters that could have pointed the finger towards Cuba and Cuban agents, just like they did a year later. That's what was happening. So it was happening, and the planners behind that are the exact regime change planners that you'll see for other regime changes. You have the hit being organized by Harvey, and you've got the propaganda being organized by Phillips a year earlier. That's what I think. Okay, there's definitely signs when you look at all the paperwork. There's no smoking gun proof that says Harvey, but when you look at all the people involved on how did the letters get intercepted? They got intercepted from, Jim, an organization called Radio Libertad. Radio Libertad was one of the receivers. That was an organization paid by the CIA to do propaganda in Latin America. Okay. Right. And that's the organization that would have received one of these PEPE letters. So right away, they send that letter, okay, the person from radio to Anamat. Okay, Anamat is a Cuban exile. The Cuban exile brings it to David Morales. David Morales in JM Wave, and it works its way up to Harvey. Now, if you look at all that, who's involved in the interception, and now who in their right mind, even the FBI said, who in their right mind would send a threatening letter like that to Radio Libertad? Okay, or so the FBI said there's something going on here. And
what did Escalante say about this?
Well, Escalante didn't. I don't know anything about the PEPE letters, but he talked about the Pedro Charles letters, right?
Yeah, I know. He did talk about the Pedro Charles letters. Yes. So
I don't know anything about the PEPE letters, but the Pedro Charles letter, what made that so interesting is one of the 5 letters never made it out of Cuba because of the fire at the post office, and Escalante had the letter, and he actually brought it to a meeting. I think it was in the 80s, Jim, where, Dick Russell had gone and all that, but he brought up that letter and he says, hey, you know what? Your 4 other letters? Well, here's the 5th in the series. I have it. Okay. And some of them are so closely postmarked to the date of the assassination that the timeline doesn't work. Now, what Hoover said is, hey, 3 of these are typed on the same typewriter. This is a hoax. Go back to bed, everyone. No. The letters talk about Mexico City. They talk about Oswald in Houston, Oswald in Mexico City. Nobody knew about that when those letters were, postmarked. Nobody knew about that. So the people who wrote those letters had to be connected to the plotters. They had to be. And that's most likely Phillips. Phillips knew about Mexico City. Phillips was following him. Phillips had this Santa project going. So that's the whole thing. Like, Jim, out of all the articles I've written, and you'll find this at Kennedy's and King, okay, that this is the one that's difficult to wrap around your brain. But if you do, if you figure out who sent and who organized the PEPE letters and the maneuvering in 62, you find who handled things in Dealey Plaza a year later. It's the same people. So you can solve the crime, you can solve it through a prior plot. If you can actually solve this crime through a prior plot, whether it's Chicago, Jim, I mean, it's not because the Secret Service burned so many damn things and shredded everything, it may not be easy to solve the Chicago plot. But this is a series of events that are centrally coordinated. That's how I see it, Jim.
What about your other article? Go into a little detail on that, the Cuba 1960 and the Lansdale Playbook. Talk about that.
Yeah, that's a fun one too. That was written by me that's my last article, and it's a very short article, and it's about Lansdale. And the reason I encourage people to go on Kennedy's and King and read that is because in 1960, the head of the Western Hemisphere, King, I think it was Noel who was in charge of the Havana station. Fitzgerald, okay, who became a very important player in the special augmented group and is seen very suspiciously, and Lansdale were communicating. And it was on a plot really to get rid of Castro in 60. And what you see in there is that they're writing about things that really are a game plan that overcomes the biggest objection. When they say, oh, it would be too complicated, too many people would know too. Well, they really talk about setting up a plot that they can blame on the Chinese communists, okay, blame on on a foe, like they tried in 63 to blame on this time on Oswald. But what they were planning to do there, and they say, hey, you know what? We'll make sure that the rifle that we're going to stash away, we have to put the right rifle that can be linked to the right people. Okay. And it's all those little details that you see, like how do we make the rifle, the Mannlicher Carcano, Oswald's Mannlicher Carcano? Well, they're talking about exactly the same damn thing in 1960. How do we make the rifle a Chinese communist rifle? How do we make paperwork look like it's Chinese incriminatory information towards the Chinese communists? So in other words, anybody who looks at that and they say, people are finding this too far-fetched. That's Oswald's rifle. He ordered it. He did it. No, the CIA knew exactly how to order a rifle, put it in someone's hands, and make it look like it was his, and make the paperwork fit. And that's exactly what the article refers to. Yeah. So I found that one really interesting for two reasons. Is that it shows the Lansdale fingerprint on Cuba very early in the game, 1960. And I found more articles about how he's involved in the planning around Cuba as early as 1960. And the second reason is he's describing what happened in Dealey Plaza and what happened around Oswald in terms of fixing him as a patsy. But he's not mentioning Oswald. He's simply saying this is what we'll have to do in 1960 to make it look like the Chinese communists did it. So that I just found that like saying, okay, anybody who wants to tell me that, yeah, what about the rifle? The rifle belonged to Oswald. There's so much proof now, Jim, right, that the rifle was never ordered by Oswald, but it was part of the game plan of CIA assassination plots to do such things. And that article is short, it's fun, and it's really revealing. And then, of course, you've got Lansdale planning around, Mongoose and everything all the way up to the assassination. So, you know, you can imagine that with people like Lansdale, Harvey, Fitzgerald, all involved in 1963 in the Cuba affair, it wasn't that hard a thing for them to do to pull off what was done with the paperwork.
Well, Harvey was actually thrown out of the Cuba thing.
Yeah, he was
Okay,
in,
and
he was in
And in
Rome.
Rome.
He was
and
in
he
Rome.
was sent over to Rome.
Yeah.
Okay, so Helms could avoid firing him. Okay, and but he was over there with Lemnitzer, and they were very much a part of Operation Gladio. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, which is very, very interesting because I just got something in the mail today from Rob Couteau where they actually found out that the whole Aldo Ray assassination plot was a part of Gladio. Somebody confessed to it. Okay. All right. And then when you had Desmond Fitzgerald, when Harvey was kicked out, Desmond Fitzgerald took over the Cuba operation.
Right.
And he was so disappointed with what had happened that he said he recommended the incoming president Johnson, you know, this has become so pathetic. We only had something like 5 raids in the last 6 months. Okay, that Castro's actually getting stronger. Okay, because he's making fun of us. All right, so I strongly recommend that you discontinue the program. So I believe that when that happened, the Cuban exiles thought, okay, we have to try for a Hail Mary pass here. Okay, you know, and so that's when they got together with this whole manipulation of Oswald. And then the DRE comes out with a newspaper within 24 hours with Castro's picture and Oswald's picture. You know, this is so, just what you got from me and Paul today. This is so obvious now.
Right.
Okay, I mean, how can anybody support the official story with all this new information that we have now, that we did not have in 1964, that we did not have in 1979, but we do have today? You know, and so this is what reason I think the Luna Committee is very important, because she has provided a channel for this new information. You know, to be perfectly frank, I can't think of one open congressional hearing that ever had this kind of information that you had in those 2 Luna hearings. The only thing I remember ever being comparable to this was Cyril Weck's 25-minute address before the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Okay. Unfortunately, then after that, he had to answer all these dumb questions, you know, about what he had just said, which was so crystal clear and obvious. All right. But that's the only thing I can recall before a congressional committee that even comes close to some of the things that were said. You know, I followed this case for 32 years. I never heard of Curtis. I don't mind saying that. I never heard of this guy, you know, let alone what he said, okay, about Kemp Clark. I mean, I had never heard that story before.
But
You have to remember to understand the import of that story is that Kemp Clark was the chief of neurosurgery at Parkland. No one knew more about head trauma than Kemp Clark did. Okay? So when he's saying is that there's no use in trying to revive this guy, take a look at this wound in the back of his head.
Yeah.
I mean, please. I mean, that would qualify. That, to me, that would be cinching courtroom evidence. I would put this guy on the stand as my first witness. Okay.
Agreed.
You know,
Jim didn't even go further and say, correct me if I'm wrong. I thought I heard him say that they received a briefing on the wounds, on the assassination, and that it was said that the shot went through the temple and caused the back wound.
Yes.
Did Curtis say
Curtis
that?
Curtis did say that.
He said there was a briefing
Yeah.
given.
Yeah. Right.
Jim, I'm going
Okay.
to throw another. Well, you're not sure. I have a nugget for you because you brought up the DRE because we're talking about files that came out. This is an interesting one. William Harvey. Now you talked, Jim, about the DRE and publicity around the DRE and the articles that come out right after the assassination from the DRE. Now, guess who their most reliable contact was for getting that publicity out? Who would you say, Jim?
Phillips?
No, but which media person? Who was their go-to?
Oh, Hendricks?
Well, he was one. And the other one, would you agree, was Ruth Luce?
Was who?
Claire Luce.
Oh,
Yeah.
Claire Booth Luce.
He was
Well,
close
yeah,
with
she
Phillips.
was there. She was their sponsor.
Okay,
Yeah.
but get this. In the files, in July 1963, William Harvey asks for security clearance for
Mhm.
Claire Booth Luce for if she goes to Italy or if he goes to
Yeah.
Washington.
Oh,
Okay,
that's real. That's pretty interesting.
that's damn interesting. And then
Yeah.
you have
Close
Claire
to
Booth Luce
Phillips.
getting.
Close to Phillips.
He asked for it too.
No, Claire Booth Luce was close to
Yeah.
David Phillips.
But here
Did the
you have Harvey. It's on the record that he asked for her to get security clearance if she went to Rome, okay, or if he went to Washington. Harvey went to Washington.
Was
What do you
she
think?
going to visit him?
I don't know who visited who, but they obviously wanted to talk and they wanted security clearance for her. And what's that all about? It's
Paul, I'm
probably
sure you know, if you're talking of 63, that's where he was. And so he's getting a security clearance for Luce to go to, well, it makes
he
sense.
didn't go to Dallas. He went to Dallas and
then you're right. There's evidence that he went to Dallas a few days before.
and
I'm sure you're also aware that the Luces, both of them, Henry and Claire Booth Luce, had that very disturbing lunch with JFK, okay, about the whole Cuban situation in 1963.
Yeah.
Okay, that I think, if I remember, I'm not sure about this, but I think I'm right. Kennedy ended up leaving, okay, because he did not agree with the things they were saying about him criticizing his Cuba operations.
I mean, look,
okay.
Loose, what's that? It's Life magazine. It's the backyard
Right.
photos. It's a Zapruder film that you
Right,
get.
right.
It's also getting Marina Oswald. That they get the monopoly on being able to interview Marina Oswald right after the assassination. It's her writing up these ridiculous articles for the DRE. I mean, this is so if you take her interaction with the DRE, who she sponsored.
Well, wait, Paul, don't forget what is probably, I believe, the most important thing. Okay,
Go on.
Kennedy turned around towards a Texas School Book Depository, and that's how he got shot in the neck from the front. Okay, remember that one? Because Mark Lane was asking this question. Well, wait a minute. How could he get shot in the front of the neck if Oswald was behind him? And Life magazine says, well, he was turned around.
The inverted slides of the Zapruder film, right? They changed the slides to make the head look like it was going forward. So I find it supremely interesting that the cheerleader for the propaganda that went out loose got security clearance. Because keep in mind, Jim, that even in 63, Harvey was meeting with Rosselli in the U.S. He had meetings all the way up till, I think, May.
You're talking about Rosselli?
Yeah, Harvey had meetings with Rosselli. They're on the record all the way up until.
I think they had a goodbye meeting. Okay.
They had three meetings, including one. They also had one in the Keys.
Yes.
Okay. They had one in the Keys and they had one in Washington. I think they had a total of 3 or 4 recorded meetings in 63. So anyway, look, this idea that there's nothing there is completely.
Well, that's what this Coey said. This guy. Okay. Yeah. after her months-long survey, of all these documents. Okay. Now, I'm not sure if you guys know this. We probably do. I think that's going to be it for the JFK stuff. Okay.
They've extended 7 months.
What?
Luna has got a 7-month extension of the.
She got an extension?
That's what I heard just yesterday, I think.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
I think.
didn't know
Okay,
that.
don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure that's what I read.
I thought they were going into the King ones next.
But
Okay,
maybe.
I thought they were going to wrap up the JFK thing and go to the King case.
Yeah.
Okay, but if they got an extension, that's terrific. Okay.
I think. Okay, geez, I'm starting to feel nervous because the three of you don't seem to. Maybe I need to revisit that, but
I'm looking for any. I don't see any.
You might be right. I don't know. You might be right.
I might be wrong though. But
I don't see any update. I don't see anything. I'm looking it up right now, and I don't see anything.
I thought I saw it on X this morning from maybe I don't want to say Jefferson Morley or someone, but he's maybe I'm wrong, I guess. But hopefully.
But anyway, we will definitely, Paul, we'll post the links to your articles in the description here. And I mean, anybody at this point that doesn't have Jim's website, Kennedy's and King bookmarked, I don't know what you're waiting for, but
And don't forget about the book.
Yeah.
Because I'm very surprised.
I'm going to take a minute. I'm going to show you guys something too.
I'm surprised that Paul has not announced that he has finally put out JFK Assassination chokeholds in the French language.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
All right.
So we have a book that is now published in both English and French on the JFK case. And that doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
Okay. Not very often at all, period. Okay. So Paul's made a real achievement, I believe. And he's actually gotten some publicity.
Oh, there it is. There it is.
Front page. Get this, guys. It's front. Look, you know how hard it is to get mainstream coverage for what Jim's work or in the US. I mean, look, you may as well.
We're aware.
It's hard. In one day, I got the front page of the #1 daily in the province.
Wow.
Now, proportionally, that would be like getting front page on USA Today, into the whole US market. And look, it even says it has a picture of the book. It has, and it says the conspiracy, if you translate it, against JFK, the conspiracy. It's not it's not the speculative. It says the conspiracy. Right. It lists the 10 proofs. Okay, gives it.
Oh my God!
The 10 proofs. It's got. I mean, look, it's 4-color. So now I'm there. I'm being called on radio, television, you name it.
All right.
So I'm a big fish in a very.
Listen, just don't forget us, Paul. Don't forget us on your way up there.
Listen. No, but I mean, what I'm saying is, sometimes you will get, and I wrote to my colleagues this, is you will get a local pride in a local author. So, some of our people, if they would say, hey, these people are known to know about the JFK assassination and they're from our neck of the town, from our woods, then they're proud. Now, the other thing
I think you should, why don't you give a shout out to the people who helped you on the translation, okay? There was at least one other person who gave you a lot of help, wasn't there?
Mark Bernard. Yeah, his name's on the book now.
Oh, it is. Okay.
I put his name on the cover of the book as we agreed to, and he's very proud. He's a French attorney. It was very difficult to translate. Very difficult. French is a beautiful, tough language. Mm-hmm. But you know what? It gives us something that's a bit more exotic, right? Because the second you can say, hey, we went a little international there's international interest. So our challenge now is France, Belgium, Switzerland, and you know where? Even London has hundreds of thousands of French-speaking people. London, England, of all things. So anyway, that's Yeah, it's fun. So I'm going to be busy with that, but I couldn't miss your show. I had to be on. So
Congratulations, Paul.
Thanks,
Congrats.
And I want to announce that Enough Out of You is going to sponsor Paul's European tour. Okay.
you guys like pate? If you like pate, you can join me and I'll get you those long baguette breads or whatever they are.
Before we wrap up, Jim, I got one question for you, and this can be off the record. I can cut this if you're not comfortable with answering it, but I have to know. Speaking of dumb questions, and you know what I'm going to say here. I have to know Oliver's reaction, and I don't mean the reaction, when he was sitting there confused as to why he was being asked that ridiculous question about Roger Stone. But what was his reaction when afterwards, or did he even have one?
He thought it was really funny.
Yeah.
Okay. He thought it was really funny because, and this is one of the reasons he thought it was really funny, because the stories the next day, there were two main stories. One was Oliver Stone demands a new inquiry into the JFK case. That was the number one story.
Right.
But the second leading story was Bulbert confuses Oliver Stone for Roger Stone. Okay, that was the second story. There was all that great information.
Right.
But Bulbert, with that stupid comment, she actually stole a lot of the thunder from Oliver.
Right.
Okay, he thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
Okay, and you really got to wonder. I mean, these people.
She knew nothing.
It's not just them. They have like a staff.
Yeah, right.
Like 5 or 6 people.
Right.
And you're going to tell me that nobody detected this in advance? Miss Bulbert, Oliver Stone is a different person than Roger Stone.
That was amazing.
Okay. Okay.
Hey, guys, before we wrap up, can I plug something on Kennedy's and King and co-author that I think you should have on your show? Jim published something, an article by Andrew Eiler, and it's all about. I mean, I've never seen research like this. He's talked to people directly involved with the ARB. He's gone to the National Archives. I went there with him, and he's the first to look at the non-availability of something called final determination orders.
Mm-hmm.
These final determination orders, according to Andrew, were legal. Okay, they had legal standing, and they were given by the ARB to NARA, and it should have forced everything that's being declassified now to be declassified way earlier. And those forms in themselves are interesting. They should be declassified. Nobody talks about the actual forms, but they're difficult to find. We found them by luck. They happen to be in a box that Andrew got, and we saw them by luck. And we were able to see the difference between the release dates and, and when they should have been released and what's actually, anyway, if you have Andrew and you have your people on, have Andrew on and you have your people read that article at Kennedy's and King. Maybe Jim,
part 1 is up and he's working on a part 2. Okay. And he's really going to bring the hammer down on the National Archives, okay, in part 2. In part 1, he drilled down on the ARB and the proof that final determinations were actually done, okay? And the gist of the article is that everything should have been out there in 2017 if the final determinations have any weight at all, and they do.
Or before, a lot before too. Because some had
a lot of them were actually before 2017. That's correct. Yeah.
Well, Sean, correct me if I'm wrong. He spoke about that when he was on with us before, didn't he?
It's even not that. We've had him on a couple times. But this article just came out, Billy.
But the last time he was
mentioned, he mentioned that, but this article just came out.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah.
There's a lot that transpired between.
Yeah. Since then, there's more.
The article.
Okay. All right. We'll definitely have him back for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Listen, guys, this is fantastic. I thank you guys so much for coming on and talking about this. We really appreciate it. It's great information. for our listeners and our viewers. Sean, anything before we wrap up?
No, I just want to tell Jim the great job you did. We're proud of you, buddy. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
And
congrats.
if I give a last plug,
Sure.
okay, to my Substack, okay,
Sure.
which I'm doing 2 4-part series, one on King
Right.
and one on Bobby Kennedy, because I really want to encourage Luna to go ahead and have hearings on those 2 cases.
Yeah.
And I really, really hope that she gets Judge Joe Brown there on the
Yeah.
King case. All right?
Wow.
And that's what I'm going to urge her to do.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you, guys.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
That's Enough Out of You podcast is executive produced and written by Bill Rader and Sean Kane and edited by Bill Rader. The That's Enough Out of You podcast and logo are exclusive property of Bags of Chicken, LLC. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or accounts of this podcast without the express written consent of Bags of Chicken, LLC is prohibited. So don't even try it.